Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So I don't know how much you guys have kind of had a play around with the actual dashboard area and what you can do with it, other than actually looking at some of the examples and showcases that they kind of show on their website. But effectively, to kind of intro, we've been doing design and kind of web builds for nearly like 15 years or something like that. And we've kind of gone through paces of trying all kinds of tools, all kinds of software, platforms, doing things from complete scratch, like building stuff completely, from nothing and kind of going up from that point. And currently at the moment, there's a few really good apps and platforms to use. One of them is Webflow, which is an amazing, amazing tool, really comprehensive, really powerful, but still requires a bit of a learning curve in terms of the general kind of terminology and structures of typical web builds. So without any kind of prior knowledge of that, it becomes a little bit tricky. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. There's a few visual builders and things that you can bolt onto platforms like WordPress, which are really, really good as well. But similarly, they require you to kind of understand some aspects of terminology and how general sites are structured and built. Now, we've been using ReadyMap for a while. We're kind of one of the early adopters of this platform when all they did was really just editorial in a sense. And since then, it's kind of evolved into this platform that does all kinds of stuff now. And luckily, we've been working quite closely with the development team to kind of build some of those features out and kind of test them and play around with them. So we've been using this for a few years now, and it's been great for certain things, but it still has its limitations, just like with anything else. Now, the typical things that we use this for are presentations, for example. So we tend to do interactive presentations for clients. They're really good for kind of very quick turnaround, showcase, one-page websites, stuff like that. And really good for testing ideas as well. So even on a prototype level, you can have an initial design that you're working on, throw them up in here, and then kind of play around with a few animations and test those interactions out. So really good for that kind of stuff. And things like, typical things like portfolio websites, websites that don't have too complicated functionality, really good for those things. It can go as far as having e-commerce on the website, but anything that requires things like user accounts or whatever else as well, those things are far more complicated and not necessarily possible within this platform. Maybe in sometime in the future, but just not yet. So my kind of first question then, and this is going to be an open question to everyone, is, and rather than kind of everyone speaking, I think what the best thing to do is to kind of put your answer in the chat function. Is what do you want your website to do, and what do you want users to do when they kind of visit your website? What is the purpose of this for you personally? And yeah, what's the sort of main objective that you would like potential clients or visitors of the site to do? This will help just give me a bit of context around some of the challenges and requirements that you guys have individually.
So I guess I'll jump in. I mean, I'm just pretty intrigued to see what it's like compared to some of those other kind of build sites out there. For us, I mean, we're working very closely now with Curate anyway to develop the new a sort of interim homepage on our site to see what we can do in terms of adding value to people coming to the site in this time. Obviously, people can't book any spaces, so just quite intrigued to see what the future of kind of web design looks like. To see if someone as rookie as me could potentially build something like this as well.
Yeah, you can definitely build it. Like you don't need to have any knowledge. Like in terms of future proofing, something like Webflow feels like the more comprehensive tool, just because it's a lot more powerful. But this is really good for kind of quick ideas and doing kind of really quick fancy things in a sense. So less comprehensive, less complex sites.
Cool. Well, I guess that sort of ties in nicely because it's all about, being proactive rather than reactive in these kind of situations. So being able to pump out quick ideas is ideal. So yeah, that's good to learn.
Cool. Who would like to go next? How about you, Adrian?
Sorry, I put it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, you actually mentioned it earlier, which was a site project proof of concept. Working up sort of stories on it and being able to present them interactively.
Yeah. Okay. And I'd imagine those will be kind of interchangeable in a sense based on whichever content or kind of idea that you're looking to promote.
Yeah, one of the things that we do for clients is to take an idea and present it to investors or to other, interested parties. And quite often the website is a mock-up website is a way of gaining interest. It doesn't necessarily need to be a business that is selling its product or service through a website, incidentally, but sometimes having that is a better way of giving information than, say, a PowerPoint presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is perfect. So this is actually something that we've done quite a lot, especially in the sort of earlier days of when this was kind of a relatively newer platform. But even I think, so we've been in business for about 4 years now as Curate Labs. And during our first year, we had a similar thing where, the industry standard was to kind of put together these detailed PDFs for proposals and kind of pitches and things. And, they're all relatively static and relatively boring and follow this kind of rigid format. And for us, we started putting them within ReadyMag and started playing around with interactions, having them a bit more sort of engaging in a sense. And what we found was, I think at the time, there wasn't many people doing this. Like I couldn't even name you one if I could at the time. But what we found was that probably about 90% of the projects that we started pitching for, and by doing them through ReadyMag rather than a standard PDF, we were winning those pitches. Purely because we were just making them more engaging and more kind of story driven in a sense. And for us as a business which was starting out, when we kind of began Curate Labs, we legally weren't allowed or able to take any of the work that we did in our agency roles prior to that. So being able to show like the storytelling aspect of our work and be able to be very creative in the sense that we do our proposals was a really kind of driving force in us winning those projects, because other than that, it would have just been a promise. So really good for that kind of thing and really good for conversions. How about Mary?
Yeah, I put it in the chat as well. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting.
I can't access the chat at the moment, sorry.
Sorry.
It's been hidden, yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking at doing some kind of portfolio of my work, and potentially some of our clients kind of want simple portfolio websites, and also for the sort of presenting stuff to them as well.
Okay, cool. So portfolio site for yourself, is this for like you as an individual or for you as like a business?
Individual.
Okay, cool. And so the one thing with clients, we don't tend to build anything for clients within this just because there's not really any kind of, sorry, my phone's doing something. Sorry. So yeah, we don't necessarily do this for clients just because there's no content management system on this. Mm-hmm. And I'd imagine if we did do this for clients, they would likely mess it up very, very quickly. It's a very kind of creative tool. It's one of the, in our opinion, it's one of the best kind of blank canvas tools in a way, that don't necessarily follow the rigid format of how you would typically build a website structure. Yeah. Which means that you can kind of pixel push things in a way where clients don't necessarily have the design skills or the kind of knowledge in terms of layouts and structure and things like that as well. So take that with a pinch of salt if you're going to offer this as a thing for clients. It could also mean that if you do that, then there's an ongoing relationship there that you can have in terms of managing their websites, which is
I don't think it'd be us managing. It's more just like this is an option for you if you you don't want to use, I don't know, you don't want to pay for Wix or whatever it is. Wix is terrible. I have to say I'm not a fan of it at all. Like it's really, really standard and not a good platform to use really. But same with Squarespace, really, really limited and you can only go so far with those things. But, okay, great. So personal portfolio and potentially kind of using that for clients as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So is it Eke or Is, or I don't know how to say it, so I'm going to say this really wrong, but please correct me.
It's the one in the brackets. It's AJ.
AJ, that's so much easier. So much easier. Okay, AJ. How about yourself?
So my main aim is to build a website for myself.
Okay.
Because I just launched a new service during this lockdown, and I don't have any other digital presence other than LinkedIn.
Okay.
So it's just like building a website for telling what I'm doing and who am I, and maybe like the main aim is to make people to want to book a call with me. Actually, the main aim is to the call to action is to book a call with me.
Yeah.
Basically.
Okay, great. And what is it you do, AJ?
So I'm a productivity buddy. It's more like a coaching system. So, and I want it to be, I mean, it's for business purposes, of course, but I want it to be like a personal friendly thing. That's why when I watched some of the Ready Mac tutorials, I thought like it seems really easy with the Ready to make like more friendly and more like catchy websites rather than as you said, rather than like the Wix templates, which are very similar to each other.
Yeah. I have to say, like, ReadyMag is super, super simple and really, really easy. You can jump straight in and start building sites without having any knowledge whatsoever. And I was saying this earlier before you kind of jumped on the call that a lot of the other platforms kind of follow the rigid structure of how you build websites, and without any kind of prior knowledge to how those structures are built and how you set up websites, it can become a bit of a learning curve and a bit of a time eater in a sense. But this makes it really easy, really, really simple, really straightforward. And the way the UI is designed and structured makes it possible to build websites in minutes. Okay, cool. So thanks for sharing, everyone. That's really good. That helps give me a little bit of context in terms of what you're after. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start going through the agenda and kind of walking you through the platform and kind of give you indications to what can be done. If you do have questions, it's a relatively small group at the moment. So if you do have questions like halfway through something, or if I'm going maybe a little bit too fast, feel free to just kind of jump in, interrupt, and just kind of ask a question. Also, if I do become a little bit vague in terms of the feature or whatever it is, and you need a little bit more context, again, just kind of speak up. Okay, great. So as you load up your project, this will be a blank project here. This is your kind of overview in terms of your number of pages and the structure of that itself. So by default, you have a couple options to set up this project. If you click on the spanner, or the cog rather, here you can start to customize what that project is. So you can kind of create a sort of specific URL here. This will be like a default ReadyMag URL. We've obviously kind of mapped some of this to our domain, so we can kind of have these more custom URLs. You can select a project title. So let's just call it AndCo Masterclass. And then you can add, descriptions in terms of what that project is. This stuff is good for all your kind of SEO and your general kind of marketing. You can set privacies. Now, some of these features are going to be disabled for the free plan. So things like, I believe like, these kinds of toggles will be disabled for the free one. I'm not entirely sure about the password protection, but some of this stuff will be kind of grayed out. You have ability to map your domain. So if you do have a custom domain, you can add analytics, you can add Google Tag Manager. And at the moment, you can't see this. If I publish this, actually, you'll be able to see this now. Now you can see I can kind of map my domain. And then in order to do this, you'll need to have some knowledge in terms of how you add CNAME records and A records within your domain settings. There's lots of dialogue around this. So if I just did, I don't know, I'll just do, I'm pretty sure this doesn't exist, but okay. So it just says it's not available. But if you do have a domain that does exist, it will give you some instructions in terms of how you can set that up. And it's pretty straightforward. It's relatively easy. Okay. And then when you go into your viewer, you have your more finite kind of editing capabilities within this. So you have two ways to kind of present your project. You have vertical, which basically allows you to have this continuous scroll, or you can go horizontal, which allows you to kind of start thinking about designing specific pages and creating a navigation around those. Scale layout is something that works on a kind of more responsive layout. So I'll kind of demonstrate this a little bit later to kind of give you a bit more context. The slide-in transition is basically a small little animation and style that happens when you kind of flick through the pages. It's really just a bit of a shadow. And then you have a whole bunch of other features here. So you can choose to have the navigation arrows on and off, the menu button, the project info, share button, page counter, and the end page. Again, some of this will be disabled, and I think with the free ones, you have to have things like the end page and so forth. Progressive images is a new feature that they've just added, which is converting images to WebM format, which is basically a much more compressed version. It makes the site much smaller and much more faster to load, but doesn't lose any of its quality. And these are the kind of general settings. So let's just say, you know, I'm happy with my description, I'm happy with everything else, all these settings. Yep, this all sounds good to me. I'll keep this as is. I'll just publish those settings now. You don't have to publish every time you make a change. You can just do this when you're ready to kind of publish. So I have my first page here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a few more pages. You can choose templates, and they have a whole bunch of out-the-box stuff that you can use to play around with. If you want to experiment with things like the animations or some of the other kind of features, it might be good to use these and kind of dissect them in a way so that you can kind of see how they've set up animations and structured them. But let's just add a blank one for now. Okay, so as we go into the canvas, this is your kind of workboard here. So you'll notice that you have this one sort of box in the middle here. This is basically your safe area. Now this isn't too much of a problem if you have that scaled layout setting turned on, but generally speaking, when it comes to the sort of structure of this site, I'd sort of recommend keeping things within this. And this is mainly just if people have smaller screens, you know, so you're kind of looking at this as a kind of safe distance. So the first thing to do is just to set up your canvas. So firstly, I'll kind of show you a couple of things here, which is really immediately obvious. This blue thing here allows you to adjust the page depth. So at the moment it's set to a default of 672, but let's just say I'm going to have, I plan to have a lot of content on this page. So I'm going to change this to 2000 pixels. And that's just made this page a lot more deeper. I can also just drag this up and down depending on what it is. So let's just change this to a round number. So the first thing you'll see is your sort of layer and tool section here. This shows your layers. So at the moment, I've got nothing in here. These are the kind of set things in the background. This is your sort of edit and redo section here. And then here you have your different viewports. So you can start setting up your layouts for tablet and mobile. So the first thing we can do is go here and change the grid settings. So if you turn the grid on, you can see there's that grid there, but then you can also have guides as well and set the columns. So the typical thing for websites is 20 columns. Let's just kind of reduce that maybe to 15. And then I'm going to add a bit of a margin as well, just because I don't want content to be right to the edge of the browser. So I'm going to do 50 on each side. Now, typically, I don't necessarily use the grid part just because things will snap weirdly. Oh, that end one hasn't worked. But what I do is, yeah, I create 12 columns for desktop and then usually add probably like 25 so that I have a nice kind of element of structure to the page. And then you can toggle that on and off. So if you just click on grids and then go to guides, you can turn that on and off here. And then obviously H is the shortcut. So for things like blocks, you don't have to worry about. Sizes is a good thing to keep on just because it gives you some live settings in terms of your widgets, which I'll go through in a minute. But relatively speaking, this is kind of a setup structure. Now, this is just for desktop. Each viewport for tablet and mobile, you'll need to set up a new grid and sort of structure to the page as well, just because obviously those things vary differently. Does anyone have any questions so far? Nope. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's start with adding some things to your layers. In fact, actually, before we do that, what I'll do is I'll show you what some of these settings mean on the back end. So as you can see up here, I've got a preview button and the menu button here. The menu button just brings you back to this view here. So you can always come back and change the settings if you need to. Currently we have, okay, let's turn on this slide in transition. And we have it set to vertical. So I'll show you what this is. If I just actually change this page to a different color. So if I go to the background setting, you also have the option of a solid color. You have the option of a singular image. So let's just say, you know, you can go Flickr or Unsplash, which are free kind of royalty-free image libraries that you can use. You can choose to have a slideshow where you can kind of drag multiple images in, or you can have a video in the background and you can just paste the link from either YouTube or Vimeo. So let's just go with a single image for now. I'm going to click on Unsplash and I'm just going to search for co-working. Cool, I've got all these free images to use. So if you hover them, you can kind of get this really vague preview to kind of get an idea. But let's just pick this one. This one looks like a nice, simple image. So this is the background image. So as you can see, my grid is still kind of here. So I can start placing items on top of that if I wanted to. I'm going to actually go back and change this background to black and then go back to the photo so that if I decide to change the opacity of the background, I could either dim it so that the background color kicks in at the same time. But let's just keep it 100 for now. So now if I'll show you what this transition looks like. So we have in the settings, we have this slide-in transition. We have all these sort of features ticked, the project info, the menu button, navigation arrows, share button, and so forth. So let's just go and preview this page. Now there's nothing on this page, so it's white. Now you can see if I scroll down, once I get past that breakpoint of 1400 pixels, which is what I've set the page, this is that transition here. We use this a lot in our case studies, basically on our website. You get this sort of shadow and it feels like a page turn almost. But then because we have things like the menu set, you can do things like this as well, where you can just kind of navigate and click through to the project. So for things like presentations, this is great because then you can just actually go to the section that you need to go to. You can also, even on this page, set up anchor links to link to these pages so that there's a bit more of a kind of native UI within this. Okay, so that's those settings. So if I go back here, just republish that for now. So the share button would just be another button next to that menu, which you'll be able to see once we actually go to the live site. Okay, cool. So now, prior to actually doing any layout, I think for myself, what I normally like to do is start setting up my document. Now, some of this might not necessarily be ready and out the box. So these will be things like the colors I'm going to use, the fonts I'm going to use, the styles I'm going to use. Some of this might not be predetermined. So I may want to experiment first before I actually start setting these up. So let's just say, okay, I'm going to start with like fonts. So these are all your widgets here. I'll go through all of these in a bit more detail, but I'll go through the kind of setting up first. So I'm going to click on that. It puts in some dummy copy. So let's just like put this here. And that's another good thing about this. You can just drag and move things around and make it really, really easy. So I'm going to turn off the guides for now, just to make it a bit easier to see. And I'm just going to say, you know, this is going to be a heading. Just use the slang terminology. Okay, so I'm going to style this, I think. As I select on a widget, you'll notice that these tools and these extra settings start appearing on the right-hand side. So these are the sort of widget settings in a sense, but then if I kind of double click into this, I get the text settings. So the start shows me the preset and default styles that are available in this project. So I can either change these or delete these or just kind of create my own new ones. So for now, I'm just going to delete these because I don't want to use any of these. Okay, cool. So this is going to be my heading. So I'm going to click on the type thing and I'm going to maybe pick a font here. So I have a whole bunch of stuff that I've already got here, but if none of these feel right, I'm going to go into the library and maybe grab something from Typekit, from this Foundry, Google Fonts, or this Foundry here, I can't remember the name, Type Today, that one. And this one's Web Type. So let's just say Google Fonts. You can browse all kinds of stuff here. You can filter them based on the style. I'm going to pick this one just because it's very obvious, not very nice in style, I think, but I'm just going to add that to the project anyway. So I kind of like this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have a look at my grid again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this right to the margin and I'm going to expand this box. So it's much bigger. And then basically I'm going to go back to this setting here and I'm just going to drag this up and increase the size of this. In fact, it's going to take me long. So I'm going to just say 200. I'm going to go massive. Actually, that's too big. Let's say 150. That's great. So this is currently synced or linked rather. So I'm going to unlink that and then basically change the height of that text so that it feels a bit more neater. Yeah. Okay, cool. So now you can see it's kind of cropped here. So when you have a red line underneath, that basically means that you're not within the safe zone. So if I just drag this down till it gets green, or blue rather, then that feels safe. And the reason why it's giving me this extra buffer thing is because some browsers will render these fonts differently and they may end up being a bit chunky. So this is quite close to the margin, which is a little bit of a danger, which basically means that it would look like that on some browsers, and that's probably not a good thing. So I may actually just make this a little bit smaller and just reduce that a little bit more again. I'm going to go here, go to 100. That feels more neater, but then I'm getting a bit of a crop up here. So if I go and hover at this top bit, I can start kind of messing with the spacing a little bit. I can even add some at the bottom here so that there's a bit of padding. Okay, so as a heading, I feel like, okay, cool, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I feel like this is going to be my H1, my heading 1 tag. I like this. I select it, I click on the star, and I just add it as a style. And then you can kind of click on this. You can change this from P, which means paragraph, change it to H1. You also can cycle through H2, H3, H4, and then back to paragraph. So I'm going to select this as H1. So that's all good to me. So now I have this as a style. And then basically, if I add another piece of text, I can just change this to a heading as well, just by going here and clicking there. So we start going through and basically set up styles with fonts and things like that as well. So, you know, something like this, let's just say, I'm gonna not do that. I'm gonna change it to something that's a bit more clear. So I'm just gonna pick this because it's easy. So let's just say 20, unlink that, just give it a bit more space. I'm gonna get rid of these spaces again because I just copied that box before. Change that to 25 so it works on my grid. Okay, so now I'm going to say this is just my body copy. So there's a similar thing where I just add it as the body copy here. So this is my first page. So as you can see, like there's some things that overlap here, but these are just, they're fine. So I can see these in the layer as well. And I can rename these. So I know this is my heading. So I'm going to double click this and just change it to heading. So that's a little bit more clear. Change this to body copy so that I know what I'm playing around with. So this is the first part of the page. So if I turn off all the guides, I can kind of see this is what it will look like. So now if I preview, that's the first part of my page. It's as simple as that. You start constructing your page elements and just kind of playing around with the layouts. Now I'll show you one other thing. If we go back into the project settings and let's turn on the scale layout, I'm going to go bigger. So I'm going to say 6,000 just because super wide screens are about that. And then now if I go into this, you can see it's just scaled. So this will snap now. If I change the size of my browser, this will just snap to that grid. So basically, if I turn this off again, what scales is the entire grid. Hence why I have these 50 pixel margins, sort of left, right, top and bottom, basically, so that I'm not right to the edge of something if I decide to kind of scale that project. So you can really start playing around with stuff. If you want to kind of go more with this kind of full screen, full bleed aspect of design, then you kind of do that scaled layout. Whereas if you want to have more sort of column format content and then have things around it, which you can do, because again, bear in mind, I can just add, let's just add a shape. I can add this outside the border, but it just means that if anyone kind of comes at that size, you know, they're not going to be able to see it. So there's certain things that you can do. You can fix certain positions to certain areas of the page to make them more visible and to overlap. But we'll get through that in a minute. So that's the kind of setting up the font styles. And then let's just say, for example, you want to start doing colors as well. So I have this box here, and I think, you know, like one of our brand colors is like a really punchy yellow. So I'm going to just go yellow. So it's like, well, it's a bit Larry, maybe. Let's dim that down a bit. Okay, cool. So I really like this yellow. I'm going to use this across my project. I'm going to start saving these things. So you just press a plus. That's all it is. And then you click on your save colors here and everything will be here. And that's pretty much it. So you kind of start saving your fonts, your kind of type settings, which is your style sheet, as well as your colors. Then you can start kind of constructing your layouts and your page designs. Any questions so far?
I want to ask, but I'm really bad at the terminology. So
that's okay.
So when you do the scaling, does it mean that it automatically becomes like a responsive website when we publish it, or do we need to do another thing for this?
No, so the scaling only works up to a certain breakpoint, like to a certain size. So it doesn't make it responsive in a sense. So there's two basically things to bear in mind. So there's responsive design, which is where if I change the size of my browser to something like a mobile size, things will kind of fall into place, right? And that's responsive design. What ReadyMag do is they do adaptive design. So the scaled layout allows you to scale what you have on the desktop version up to a certain breakpoint, which is a very, very small laptop, potentially even a tablet. But then when you go beyond that, or I guess reduce below that, then it doesn't scale. It stops at a certain point, meaning that you have to design the mobile version of that site. And that's what this section here is for. So when you click on here, you actually have the option to kind of click through and design your mobile version. I'll show you what this is like right now real quick. So typically when we do stuff on ReadyMag, we don't really do the tablet aspect just because the breakpoints for tablet are so small and minute for the most part that the small design for desktop can cater for most tablets. So we usually just kind of skip it in that sense. And that's just us, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to do that. It means, you know, it's always good practice to do it maybe. But let's just turn on mobile for a sec. You can just see it's auto-generated the layout with the current style I have. Now, this looks terrible, right? This isn't going to work for mobile. So I'm going to go back to here and I'm just going to say, click on this little refresh icon and it will say restore to desktop layout or mobile auto layout. Now what it's done is the auto layout. So I'm going to go back to desktop so I can just see what I had before. So now it's like, okay, you can see those margins have changed. And if I click on the guides, it's just got this basic 2-column guide. So that's not going to work for me. So I'm going to go back into the guides here. I'm going to change it to a 6-column, reduce that gutter because that is way too big. And then again, create a 20 pixel margin for all sides so that I have a bit more of a framework. So now I can just start to resize things. I'm going to make this box horizontal. I'm going to stack this. And this is going to be way too big for mobile. So I'm going to actually just now change this size to say 60. 60 sounds good. I can get rid of these sort of margins now because they're not necessarily needed. And then now if I just move this and scale it things. Still a little bit too big for those margins. So let's just go a little bit smaller. Pixel push at this point. So I'm going to go 50. So if that's the case, I don't like how this is kind of fragmenting itself. So if I turn off the guides for a sec, I'm going to double click on this and I'm just going to create a bit of a margin here, just so it pushes it down to the next line. And just resize this to the point where it snaps. I don't want to go to the red because then that's a little problem. Restructure these things. Okay, now this is the mobile layout. Happy with this. So now if I flip back to the desktop, you'd see nothing has changed. This is exactly how I left it, which is exactly how I like it. But then now if I go to mobile, these settings have saved themselves. So if I preview this, I can see this is there. And then you can see how it's, the next page with the image comes in. So adaptive design basically means that you do have 3 sets of settings, which you can start to create. But for the scaled layout, that's really more for the purpose of desktop and allows you to kind of play around with how you do your layouts rather than it kind of converting it to responsive. Does that answer your question? Does that feel clear?
Yeah. Okay. Any most of my question, yeah. But okay. As I said, I'm really inexperienced with web design, so
yeah.
But thank you.
It's
makes sense. Makes more.
Yeah, it's a good place to experiment. So play around with things and don't be afraid to kind of activate and deactivate features and things. Like just see what happens when you click on stuff. It's a good way to kind of learn things. It won't take you long to get your head around this, I don't think. Once you kind of start playing around with all the widgets and the capabilities within that, you'll be able to grasp it quite quickly. Okay, cool. So we've kind of set up our heading, our body copy, our colors, things like that. Let's just go back to desktop. We have our guide. So now I'm going to go through these widgets. So now if I deepen this page a bit more, so we've got a bit more space. So now I'm going to go through, we've showed the text field, we've showed the shapes. If you click on shapes, you can also add triangle, circle, a line, even icons if you want. So, if I click on the settings again, I can actually start searching icons. There's some preset ones here, but let's just say I'm looking for, I don't know, some kind of party or celebration type thing. So if I just search party, there you go, perfect. This is what I wanted. I wanted to celebrate something, so this is what I'm going to use. So I've got this icon here. That's just a shape. If I want to click on something and I want to change it, again, you can just go to the settings area, and then you have all your options here as well to kind of change things. Within this, if I go back, you have the option to change your colors. I'm in my kind of preset ones at the moment, but if I want to be a bit more kind of customizable with these things, I can kind of play around and choose what colors I want. This looks very, very Larry, so I'm going to do this. You can link it. So you can link that icon. If someone hovers it and clicks it, it goes to a certain page in the project, or goes to an external link, or you have these options here. So you can choose a website URL, jump to a page in the project, email, phone number. You can anchor link, which is basically a certain pixel amount down the page. Scroll to top, which just takes you to the top of that page, or you can go back. So go back is good for things like on-page menus if you're creating those, where you have a button that links to like a menu page, for example, and then on that page you have a go back button, which just takes them back to the last page they're on. You can rotate it, so you can go 90 degrees, you can flip it, or you can just be a little bit more precise about how you do that. You can also pin it. So this is a universal feature that you could do for pretty much any item. So using this kind of top grid here, I can pin it to the top middle, and I can create, let's say 50 pixel margin from the top. And basically when I scroll, you can see that just stays there, which is quite fun. You can also just drag it. So you can kind of just move it around the position you want it to stick. But let's just say top middle is not good. So, you know, you can go top corner, you can go to the left or straight to the middle. So it's just always there. If you don't want to pin it for the whole page, and let's just say, rather than always being on the left-hand side, I just want it to be on the left-hand side around this sort of area where the box is, right? So I'd use this bit here. So rather than browser window, you'd be doing it to the page. So now this would be fixed to the left of the page around here. And basically what that means is now if I shorten my kind of browser, you can see it stays there. Whereas before it would just be pushed to the side. So for small screens, this would work really well because it will always be there. For large screens, it will still be visible. So it's just a way of kind of making sure things are in view when you're kind of constructing your layout, and making sure that, for example, if I unpin this, that they don't get lost with these smaller scales. So you can really start to play around. You could also actually, when you kind of click on something, you can choose whether you want that item to be on all pages or above pages. And this is really good for menus. So for example, if I do above all pages, and let's just say I'm going to put it in the middle. Now, if I preview, that color hasn't kicked through, but if I preview, this stays on top of the whole project. So I can start fixing items in there. So for example, if you have, as you were saying, AJ, if you have a contact button or something where it's like download my CV or contact me or book a meeting or something, you can have those fixed throughout the whole project and have that CTA always there, that call to action. So there's a lot of flexibility around how you have things visible. Okay, so we have added an icon. I'm going to get rid of the fix on that and turn that off. So the next item we have is buttons. It's a pretty obvious one, pretty straightforward. Default button here. You can edit the text. If you click on the settings, you can change the default color and the hover color. You can change the radius. So you can make it a round button. Let's just say 100. You can create borders. So let's just give it a 2-pixel border. You can change the font style, so you can kind of keep it consistent with the fonts that you've been using. So I use source sans like before. Change the text color. White actually works quite nicely. Let's just make it a little bit more bold so it's a bit more clear. Let's actually get rid of this stroke. And let's change the color to that yellow, which actually means now I have to change that color. So let's go back. Okay, cool. This is great. But I want to have a little bit more. I want something else on here. So I'm going to click on this icon option, and I can now pick an icon to use. So I'm going to do a little star. I can change the size of it. I can make it a little bit smaller. And let's just say it is a contact button. So I'm going to pick this little speech bubble here because that feels pretty cool. So that's why that doesn't really visible. So now if I go back into the settings, I can change the icon color to something that's a bit more legible. And now this is expanded based on the size I made it. So I'm going to go back and change that to 60 pixels height. And this looks cool. So now if I click on hover, blue is the hover color, so I don't really want that. So let's change it to black, and let's just put that opacity up. And let's turn on the transition so that it fades. So now if I preview this, that happens, which is great. So now this feels like a really cool button. So I'm going to add this. If I turn my guide on, I'm going to add this here. Okay, great. So there's a little bit of a layout here. So now the button seems good. So I'm going to link this somewhere. So let's just say I'm going to link it to the next page. So I'm going to go page 2 currently because I haven't got a name for these pages yet. And you can change these names. If you click on the menu again, you can start customizing the name of each page here and giving it a custom URL. So let's just say page 1 is called AndCo. If I don't type anything here, the default will be /1. So I'm going to go AndCo to kind of be clear, and this will aid in my SEO. And then I'm just going to call this one image because there's not really much more on there. So let's just change this to image. So now there's a name. And if I go back into this and click on the link, you see that's changed to image because I've just changed the name of that project, or that page rather. And you can choose to open it in a new tab. Obviously this is part of the project so that you won't be able to do that for a page, but let's just say you have a link. You can choose to have it open in a new tab or not. And that's the button. So if we move on to the hotspot, this is kind of a fun one. So here you can kind of create hidden pieces of content. So I'm gonna maybe create something here. Let's make it part of this little party thing. And then you can choose to have an image or some text to place here. So let's just say text, and I'm just gonna grab a bit of lorem ipsum. And I'm gonna paste this stuff in. Now that font is horrible, so I do not want that. So I'm gonna go back into my styles and pick the typical font of it. That feels too big to me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new one. Let's just reduce the size of that, 14, 20, yeah, cool, that sounds good. It's got a nice margin and padding there. And I'm gonna change the color of that. Actually, I quite like this sort of, this purple pinky thing. So I'm gonna add this to my swatches here. So if I change this, click on this, I'm gonna change the color of that type to that, so it feels a bit consistent. And then you can kind of see what this looks like, right? So now I don't like the shadow, I don't like these sort of rounded edges, kind of feels a bit weird, this blue spot, I want to change that. So if I just click outside of the text, you have your hotspot settings here. So rather than a circle, I can change to an icon or to a custom thing. So let's just search for, I don't know, we could search for something. We could do info again. Let's just do a little simple one here. You can change the color of it. So let's go this color. Well, actually, let's differentiate. Oh no, they can't see that. Okay, cool. So this is my icon. So I can choose, show the thing on click or show it on hover. So let's do hover. And then let's go onto our speech bubble and let's choose the positions. We could choose to have it on the left, on the right, below or above. So let's keep it maybe on the right actually. Feels like it makes sense. Color is white. If I want to change that, you can change that too. So you can just be really Larry, really custom about it. But white feels okay for now. So let's just leave it there. You can choose to toggle the shadow on and off. Let's keep it there for now. And let's just change the radius. Well, let's make it too round. Let's make it square. Let's just change that. Let's remove that. So now if I preview this, this happens, which is great. So you can have hidden layers of information based on what you're presenting and kind of include areas for more detail. For some reason this color isn't kicking in. So let's just do that and see what happens. Yeah, that's kicked in now. So I'm going to change this back. Okay, and that's your hotspot. Again, you can place these anywhere, so you can just decide where to do things. So now the form, it's a bit more of a complicated one, but it's pretty straightforward. You can create a form here. You can move, change the size of it. At the moment, we have a default name and email, but let's just change that. So I want to add a new field. Let's just say phone number and a checkbox because we're in the, I say EU, we're probably not in the EU anymore. Checkbox because of things like GDPR. So we still need to have kind of some considerations around data and maybe like just a text field for something like a message, you know. I'm going to expand this a little bit so you can add and subtract the depth. And this feels really long, so I'm going to just shorten this a little bit. So now I can start customizing things. So you can kind of choose, rather than having name, you can kind of do a question. So it's like, so you can have a question rather than just the typical placeholder. The checkbox, you can, you know, say something like GDPR just to be a bit more clear. And then, yeah, you can kind of customize all that messaging. Those fonts look horrible. So we can change those in the settings. Again, we've got Roboto at the moment. So let's just change it to SF Pro. I know I've been using Source Sans, but let's just change to SF Pro for now. Feels too big, so you can go through and change the number, the color. Again, you can create borders around the boxes if you want. The radius as well, so you can make it round or, you know, keep it square. And then spacing as well. So you can kind of reduce that down. You also have the option to change it from a vertical stack to a horizontal stack. So you can do something like this. So if you wanted it to be more kind of, you know, across the page in a sense, there's a bit too many fields here, but you get the idea that if it's like, for example, like a newsletter sign up, you can kind of use this format instead because it makes more sense. But let's just keep it stacked for now. Now this is the kind of default styling. So again, you can kind of change the color of these fields and kind of have whatever you want. That's a bit too much. But you could also change the general kind of style of this, right? So you also have the option between fields and button. Again, you have all those same settings here. But rather than have it like a field thing, I want to change it. So here's like a default set of an outlined version as well as underlined. So you can kind of start getting these preset styles out and then sort of customize them based on what you want it to look like. So for now, let's just change the button. And then the hover is yellow still. So let's just change that to something like black. And then change that text color to white. Cool. So now I have my basic kind of form, but the idea is that where's this information going to go? So now after I've kind of customized it and set it, you kind of click on this arrow here and you actually start getting your settings here. So the first email is the default email you have set up to your account. So whichever email you signed up to the ReadyMag account with, that will be your default. But you can set a second email. You can set Google, which is basically like a Google Sheet that you can create in Google Sheets. You can set it, send it to your MailChimp or to a URL. So if, for example, you know, they are signing up for a newsletter and part of signing up means that they get this free PDF of information, then you can kind of set it to your MailChimp and a URL. So after they've submitted the form, you capture the data, but then you also send them to a URL, which is hidden. So there's loads of options you can have with this form. Any questions?
Maybe a detail, but is there also like an optional or like a, what's that? Like a mandatory field or an optional field for the form?
Yes, yeah. So if I click on this again, so if I click on a form, if I go into the, oh, sorry, not here, into these fields, you can click on the actual field. So let's just say the phone number. This is an optional field. So people don't need to give me their phone number. I don't need that. So I just kind of tick that. And then you can kind of create optional fields here.
Right.
So again, the text one is not an optional one as well. So if I click on that, if you click on the field, it actually allows you to change the name. But if you click on the icon next to it, you can actually say that these are optional.
Okay.
So yeah, so you have that flexibility as well. So the next widget is pictures. One of the most fun ones to use. Okay, so let's say with this one, I want to create a splash area. So this, I'm going to move this down. I'm using a short key basically. So if you use this arrow, you can basically drag anything that's underneath this widget along with it. So if I click on the arrow and I move this down, you can see, oh, that's not done that one for some reason, but I wonder why that is. Okay, so now if I move that, should be moving that as well. I don't know why it isn't, but let's just move that manually. Okay, so I'm going to create a bit more space. So now I want to create this image. I want to create a splash sort of very visual area. So I'm just going to go up until the margins at this point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to the background because this feels, I don't really want it to be in front of everything. So I'm just going to drag this down all the way to the bottom. You could also just use, if you click on the item, you also have the layer options here. So if I click on this, I can choose to send it to the back, send it up one, send it to the front, and so forth. So you can kind of quickly do that as well, rather than dragging things. So this is going to be an image. I'm going to click on my settings here, and I can drag something in, or I can, again, just kind of pick from something within Flickr or Unsplash. So we've already done this search here. So let's just find, I'm going to punch today in the face. So this is the image I'm going to pick. Yeah. Oh, I just deactivated that, my fault. Okay, great. So my image is in. So now, if I double click it, I can crop it. I can choose how much I want. So I'm going to drag this down. And then I can obviously resize it as well and move things around. I'm going to keep this at the top here. And then basically I'm going to move this other stuff down here. I'm going to have it overlap slightly. So now obviously, as you can see, because I don't have scaled layout on, if I preview this, it's just a box. This does not look good. This looks pretty bad. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm not going to use scaled layout in this design, I'm going to click on this image, and I'm basically going to give it a new setting, which is basically 100% width. So if I click on the pin tool, which I've used before, I have this new option here now, which I didn't have within the text field. And this allows me to actually pin images so that they just work 100% from a width level. So if I move my browser and change the size of it, this now kind of fits within that window, if that makes sense. And you can choose to do this horizontally, vertically, or both. So if I wanted it to just be completely across the whole page, I can do the vertical one as well. And then this will just be like everywhere. But that's just not going to work for me. That's going to be a bit too much, I think. So that works there. But then, you know, this feels a bit narrow now. So if I turn my guide on and I just move this stuff down a little bit, I'm going to expand the height of this a little bit more so that I have a bit more image to show. Guide off. Great. Doesn't quite see there, so I'm going to move, double click and bring that crop in a little bit more. Okay, great. So now I've selected my image and I've choose the setting for it. So again, you can click on the settings, you could change it. So you can choose your radius if you wanted to kind of create something round, or you also have some finite things where you can kind of do only certain corners that have a radius. So let's just say, if I do this and I click on this corner, I'm going to say I want 100. I want it to feel like a little bit more dynamic. So that's all good. You could choose your opacity as well if you don't want it to be so transparent, but let's keep it there for now. Here you have your crop settings. So you can choose to crop it differently. Because I, at the moment, have it fixed to the window, it doesn't give me many options. But if I untick this for now and have it back to this default size and I go on crop, it gives you some default settings here. So I can choose to zoom in on that crop if I want, or zoom out completely. I can choose to square it off. I could choose to fill it, or I can choose to fit based on the size of the image. So you have a lot of flexibility here in terms of how you want to create your layout. But I want to go back to what I had before. So I'm going to move this here and then go back to this sort of fixed position. And then resize this. Cool. So this is your animation tab, but I'll go through this in a minute. A little bit later on. Again, I can choose to link the image. So if anyone clicks it, hovers it, I can have all those same link settings here. By clicking this, I could also choose to have that image as a lightbox. So if I click on the lightbox setting and I just activate this, then this image will be lightboxed. So if I preview now, my image is in. If I hover, you see you got the magnifying glass, and now I can just click it, and then I get a light box here. And then you just click it again to turn that off. But this is a spotlight area, so this doesn't make sense to be a light box, so I'm just going to turn this off. And that's it. And then basically you can start to add a whole bunch of images. And creating layouts. So I'm going to delete this shape for now because I don't need this, but let's just say, in fact, I'm going to move this here and I'm going to move this over here instead. And now that's covered the image. So I'm going to just send this to the back because I don't want this to cover that. Okay, cool. So now we're having a bit of a basic layout here. Just move this down. I'll just leave this here for now. Now this is not a great design, so please don't judge. Okay. Let's just put something in here. This one, pointing at a laptop. This is a classic one. Great. Okay. So the next one is a slideshow. So much like the image widget, you can just drag a whole bunch of files in here. And if I can somehow find a whole bunch of images somewhere, let's just grab, let's search for co-working. And click on images. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag a whole bunch of these off just to use for now. All these lovely spaces. Okay, so I've just got 3 very basic images. So now, if I click on here, you can click on this and it will kind of prompt the file upload dialog, or you can just drag them in. So I'm going to just drag them in because it's easier for me. And that loads in there. And then that's just your basic slider. I'm just going to move this down because this will be much later. So now I have a slideshow here. Let's just make this bigger. Currently the images are set to fill. So let's go into the settings here. So now if I click on this, I can choose to have default arrows, which are these ones here, or I can choose to have something in a library. So let's just say I want to be completely unconventional and do something ridiculous like, you know, a musical note for the left-hand side. And then for the right-hand side, I'm just going to do a heart. Why not? So those are my things that have changed. Doesn't make sense, but you know, do what you want. You could also change this. So say you don't want to have these visible, you can just change it on mouse over. So now if I mouse over it, you can see I've got a heart on this side, and then this side I've got my musical thing. So it kind of makes it a little bit more interactive. Let's just keep it there for now. You can choose to have things like a counter. So you can choose to have a numbered counter or the classic kind of dots. You can have this to be inside or outside of the imagery. You can choose the option to make the slideshow full page in a sense. So if anyone clicks on this, they'll be able to open it up in full screen mode. You can choose your icon color. So if white isn't legible enough, you can change it to something like our pink. Yellow is probably a bit more legible. shadow on hover to just signify things like a hover over. You can add captions to each individual image and then start adding your text settings in within that as well. Or you can choose to have thumbs, so it's a bit more clickable in a sense. And then I don't like this black bar, so I'm just going to go into the color here and then put that opacity down so that it feels a bit more nicer. And again, you can change the radius. You can do, you know, make it round. You can kind of play around with it and do all kinds of stuff as well. Once you're doing your basic settings, you can also choose your transition type. So at the moment, it's just a basic slider, but I'm going to crossfade it instead because it feels a bit more soft. And you can choose the duration. So let's just up it to 3 so that it's a lot more gradual. But if you wanted it quicker, you just go to 1 and it's a lot more quicker. So you can play on click or play on hover or autoplay. And that's it. Again, if you click on here, it just shows you all your images. So you can add more, you can drag more in, you can kind of change the order as well to kind of be in the order you want it to be. And then similarly, like the images, you can pin them in certain ways. You can't do the snap to full screen with slideshows, but you can pin them in certain ways. Okay. So I'm going to move on. So video. This is an easy one. So much like the images, again, let's just make this page a little bit deeper. Plenty of room. So with the video, you just upload a link from either YouTube or Vimeo. So let's just grab one of the Vimeo top picks. Do something easy. This one looks good. Okay, so I've just opened up Vimeo. I've just selected a video and I'm just copying the URL for that video. So now if I click on here, go into the settings, paste that URL, the video comes up. So now I have a whole bunch of other settings here as well. So I can choose to autoplay this video. If that happens, it will mute it. And the reason for that is, it will explain here, I won't go into that detail, but the reason for that is Google would see it as spam otherwise. So if you have things auto-playing and there's a whole bunch of sound coming from it, then Google will pick that up as sort of spammy activity. So if you have anything auto-playing, you will have no choice but to mute it. But let's just say we don't want to do that. We want people to actually listen to the content. So I'm not going to turn on autoplay. I'm going to have on loop because, you know, you want them to kind of stay in the content. Show info, maybe not. I like more minimal design, so let's keep it simple. And the color, we're not using a blue at all. So let's just change this to that yellow that we have. Bear with me because I'm constantly having to move the zoom windows so that I can do the right settings. So let's change that to that yellow. Cool, so that's just changed there. You can see with the sort of volume control. And I'm not a fan of this cover. I want to do something a bit more custom. So let's just change that and let's create a thumbnail. And then here I can drop a file in. So I'm just going to pick that a co-working image that I had. I know that's nothing related to dolphins, but let's just use that for now. And here you go, there's my cover. So I'm going to adjust this a little bit, make it feel like a video. Cool. So now if I click on preview, I have all my stuff here, just stacked horribly. And if I click on play, auto plays the video. I can skip through, I have all my default Vimeo settings. And there you have it. Just check if there's any other things that I've missed.
Abdi?
Yeah.
Is there any way of getting rid of the Vimeo or the sort of toolbar bit at the bottom? So if you wanted something just looping constantly, but you didn't want people to know that you've, you know, ripped that image or video from Vimeo, is there any way of getting rid of that?
So if you have it autoplay and muted, this would disappear. The thing is, that's actually more of a Vimeo feature. So if you have like a pro Vimeo account, you're able to turn all this stuff off. And it's the same with YouTube. Like you'll have your on-set YouTube functions within the video as well, just because they're embedded in a sense. So what you could do is, depending on what the content is and depending on whether sound is important or not, you can autoplay. Obviously, if you have a big enough window, you can actually turn the volume on, but by default, it will mute everything. So one thing that we have done in the past for some presentations is we've had videos autoplay, but then we've put a shape on top of it and just remove the opacity. And basically all that does is prevents you from hovering over. So you'll get this on load, but then once it disappears, you know, I can't access those controls anymore. So if you have any silent video that's looping in the background, then you can kind of do this workaround, which is kind of a sort of slight hack to do it. If it is background video, you can just set that video to the background as well, which just removes those player features.
Okay, awesome. And you always have to use something like YouTube or Vimeo, or could you actually just upload your own video?
You can only use YouTube or Vimeo at the moment, just because it's embed. Otherwise, you're required to have some form of server space in order to host those files.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So yeah, so slight limitations to it, but okay, great. So video's done. So again, similar to multiple forms of content, you can create music as well. So this works very similar in a sense where you would create embeds. At the moment, there's not really many platforms out there that allow you to kind of embed content. So the default here is SoundCloud. So I can just paste some kind of content in SoundCloud. So if I just find, let's just find a track of some sort. Okay, so I've just found, oh wait, that's a playlist, I don't want that. Okay, so I've just found a random song. Now I'm gonna click on that, I'm gonna paste the link in. No, what's happened there? Oh wait, maybe I copied the wrong link, sorry. Okay, got the link here. Let's try it again. What's happening? Very strange, this is not working. Oh, that's why. I was just exiting the thing rather than actually submitting it. Okay, so I have, if I turn that off, a basic SoundCloud link here. This, I don't really like the style of this, so you can change this. So you can change the defaults from a visual player to the original player, which is what they have, or you could change this to something minimal, which is this. And if you change the size of this, you should be able to play around with it a little bit more. So at the moment, it's just got a cover and the track bar underneath, but I want to remove the cover and just have the light. So that actually looks a little bit nicer for me. Do I want the social stuff? No, turn that off. And again, I want to change that color. Let's use our pink. And now if I preview that, you have your music here. Which is great. So you can now start adding bits of audio as well. So things like podcasts are great for this. If you are some kind of music producer or something, you know, this is great as well. And again, just like with most other things, you can pin them in certain areas. So if you want to have the player completely visible throughout the whole site, the whole page, you can just pin it to the bottom or something like that. So you have your music, then you also have your Google Maps. Now, in order to use the maps, you need to create an API key. And the reason for this is that Google have recently released this sort of requirement for API keys because some websites have massive amounts of traffic and map hits. So this basically ends up costing Google a lot of money. So the idea is that you have to create these API keys, and if you reach a certain amount of map views, Google will likely start charging you for that, just because you're using a lot of server capacity. So you'll need to go into Google Maps, create a Google account within that, and actually generate your API key as well. There's information here as well, so you can just click on here, and this will kind of show you how to do it. It's relatively straightforward, very easy process. But bear in mind that you will likely be charged if you go over their sort of view limits. And then it's just a case of, in fact, actually, let me just see if I can do one right now, quick. I know this is going to take me much longer than I thought. Okay, I'll leave that for now. But effectively, just like with maps, you can just put in a postcode and it will pin the position, and then you'll have your general kind of settings within that, where you can kind of zoom in and zoom out and kind of play around with the map as well. So I'll leave that for now. You also have your e-commerce plugin. So if you actually have physical or digital products that you want to sell, you can actually start setting up a shop area. You do need to have a Stripe account in order to set this up. So this is relatively straightforward to process, but this is a bit more in depth. And I think this will take a long time in order to kind of go through how to set up a shop account, which I think we might not have time for. So the best thing to do is if you click on this, set up your Stripe account, and then just go through the tutorials, you'll be able to kind of set up process. And it's basically a way of linking products that you set up on Stripe and then just having them here within that. So when you click on this thing and you go into settings and you go into your Stripe account, for example, once you set this up within here, you'll have a list of products that are within your Stripe account. So you can start setting up certain bits of information, like, you know, things like variants, like quantity and color. If you have physical products, you can set up the add to cart button to a particular product and have those variants within that. But then it also means that you can actually start setting up your own shop layouts in any way you like. So let's just say this was a product of some sort. Rather than having a contact button, I can put this cart button here. And that would just be the sort of product page that you start constructing. And then you also have some basic ones like Twitter and Facebook. So you can choose to have your timeline, an embedded tweet of some sort, the tweet button, if you just want people to tweet it, the follow button, hashtag as well, and you can just put in your own kind of handle here, as well as the Facebook as well. So similarly, you can choose to have people like it, go on the page, or create like a bit of a comment section here. And then you just put the URL of your Facebook page in here. You can also toggle the share button on and off, and even show faces. So if people like it, then you start seeing the number of people here. So let's just change that back to a small one so that it feels a bit more, there you go. And then the last widget is the embed. So here you can actually just start embedding bits of code. So for example, typical embeds will be things like YouTube videos, but you have a widget for that. So you don't necessarily need to embed that. But let's just say you have something like a type form, which is an interactive way of doing forms. You can paste that embed code within here. Now, I believe the embed widget is a little bit more restricted within the free plan. So depending on the type of embed you have, if you have any kind of more specific customizations within that code, it will consider that as code inject, which is another tool that you can use within this. So I can actually go into the project because I have the sort of top tier level. I can go into the project and add code within the head, within the body, after and before, as well as custom CSS or anything else as well. I also have this on page, but then I also have this within the project itself. Oh, something's gone weird there. Let me just republish that. 1 second. So here you can see, so I can go in and actually start doing this on a site-wide level. And it's really simple. It's really just pasting code in. So there's nothing more to it other than that. And those are the widgets. Any questions?
So if you, sorry.
Go on.
For example, if you want to add other contact info other than like Facebook or Twitter, then we would add an icon and then put the URL to it.
Yeah, you could do. Yeah, I mean, you can present it in any way you like. So, you know, if you had
Instagram or LinkedIn or any other social platform, then.
Yeah. So what I'd do is I'd create a button normally. So I'd create a button here. I'd maybe even just delete that and maybe just go into the icons and then pick Instagram.
Yeah.
And this layout seems a bit weird. So I'm going to go back into the settings. Rather than have this horizontal, I'm going to go round or circle or square even. So let's just go square for now. And then I can resize that. I can resize the size of the icon itself. And then I can link that to my Instagram page and have that open in a new tab.
Yeah.
So if I go instagram.com, enter, it does this automatically.
Yeah.
So now I can, and then I can fix this, you know, wherever I want on the page and then have links to those platforms. So these things, I don't really use these things just because I don't really have a need for them, but you know, you can just have a series of icons. So, you know, if I just wanted to copy this, I can copy and paste quite literally, and then, you know, create 10 pixel margin, just change that icon to Facebook or something, for example, or whichever platform you want to use, or LinkedIn. There you go, boom. Icon seems a bit smaller, so I'm just going to go up a bit. And there you go, you can just start crafting all your social platform buttons. Okay, so the next thing is obviously once you've completed that, you obviously need to design everything again in mobile or tablet, or depending on what it is that you do. So now if I click on the mobile, which we kind of started playing around with, but as you can see, that page length is, you know, hasn't changed since the last time. And all these things have now sort of been placed in based on the desktop layout that I already had. So you'll need to go through and actually start editing and adjusting your layouts to be suitable for mobile. So as you can see, that's just gone on top of that imagery there. So I want to move this, you know, I need to start constructing this layout. I'm going to move this here. I'm going to change the crop of this image so that it fits within the border. Now the ordering in terms of the layers is all different because this is an adaptive layout. So it's a little bit different to responsive, but this image is too far. So I'm going to just drag this down so that it's not above the text. And really, you can just start crafting the layout. So, you know, make this deeper. I need a little bit more space for this mobile page. And bit by bit, you just go through and adjust your layouts. And now, as you'll see, if I go through, you can kind of start seeing this. If I just preview, if I click on that hotspot, you can just see it comes up as a little pop-up, which is cool, it's all good, but then everything else is still kind of needs a bit of work and needs a bit of tweaking. So you can choose to do this on all viewports, desktop, tablet, and mobile. But as I say, typically we only do desktop and mobile just because it saves a lot of time. Okay, cool. So, sorry, was someone going to say something? No, okay, cool. So I encourage you all to kind of really explore and experiment with this, like use all the widgets, play around with them, try to bend them based on what it is that you want from a stylistic point of view, as well as a functionality point of view. Once you are comfortable with a design and you're happy with the layout and you've done this for desktop, tablet, and mobile, the next thing to do is actually start thinking about the more specific settings that are going to serve you sort of later down the line. So if I go back into my project, into the overview, now I've got this set to, what have I got this set to? I've got this set to horizontal at the moment. So before I showed you vertical, where you kind of continue sliding down and the pages kind of stack in that nature. If I change this to horizontal, it basically means that I have now these individual pages. So if I preview this and I scroll down, I stop at the end of this page. I'm not going to get to the next page. And as you'll see, by default, there's an arrow here. So if I click on this, that's what happens. So it's kind of becomes more of this presentation format. But for, I think, some of the paid plans, you can hide these arrows in a sense so that you can create your own sense of navigation within these websites. So you're not bound by the typical ReadyMag navigation, which is sort of using the hamburger menu at the top here. And if you have the paid accounts, you can go through and turn all these things off. So you can turn off the navigation arrows, you can turn off the menu button, the project info, share button, page counter. The end page is basically like a little promo page for ReadyMag. So on the free accounts, you know, when you finish your project and you go to the bottom, it just says something like, you know, this website was built on ReadyMag. So it's not white labeled in a sense unless you pay for it. So I'm going to change this back to vertical just for the time being, just because it's easier. And so the next settings were like obviously naming your pages, creating those URLs, and then within here, making sure that you have a good description and title. And obviously you want to think about things like keywords and SEO and all the kind of usual kind of things that you need to consider in terms of ranking well. So again, with this project, I'm just going to change this to AndCo because a series of numbers doesn't make any sense. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy some lorem ipsum just for the sake of this to make it feel less horrible. Okay, great. So now I've done, those are project-wide settings. So now I need to go through and actually individually customize the settings for these pages. Now, if you have specific content on these pages, let's say this is all about, you know, like specific type of information, and then this is maybe something a bit more personal, you know, and the words and the keywords and things in the metadata is going to be completely different. So if I now go into the page, hover over the page, you get this sort of settings feature here, where now I can see page 1. It's auto-filled this based on the project, but I can change this now. So I can say AndCo Masterclass intro page. I'm just going to call it that. And then here you can actually have a different description based on what the content on that page is. So say if that page is talking a lot about co-working is a very clear, obvious keyword within that. So I can write a description that has co-working maybe twice in it. So blah, 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 co-working, you know. And then within that, I can actually start selecting my keywords. So I'm gonna say, well, co-working is a very clear keyword here. So I'm gonna do that and separate it by a comma. I'm also gonna do this because people spell it in different ways. Maybe even just do co-working, separate words. But then you also do some general stuff as well. So, you know, you can do work, portfolio, whatever those keywords are, you can then start crafting the individual settings for those pages. And then you can just toggle through back and forth. You can kind of do these on an individual page level. You can also have these sharing settings. Now this is only available within the paid plans, but you can actually start customizing how this appears if someone shares it within Facebook, Twitter, or anywhere else. And these are called open graph images. So you can customize this image. It picks one by default based on what the real estate looks like of the first page. And if you design it well enough, you don't necessarily need to worry about this. But if you want something a bit more different and a bit more custom, then you have the ability to change this with a pay plan, as well as the tweet message as well. So you can customize all of that. Now, these are all the SEO settings. So these are all good practice to do anyway, because then these things kind of serve you in the long term in terms of your rankings and positioning based on what your site content is. For certain things like presentations, obviously you can password protect those. So this doesn't really necessarily play much of a part within that because they're secret projects anyway. But for things like portfolios, for showcase sites, things like that, it does well to do that. Now, the one thing I haven't gone through, and this is the last thing, and this is probably where you can have the most fun, is animations, making things interactive. making it a bit more engaging. So if I load this, it's just really boring, really static, just very standard and out the box, right? I don't really want any of this. So let's just tidy up some of this. Let's just get rid of some of these elements. Okay, and let's just reduce that page a little bit, just because it's pretty severe. Okay, so now I want to animate this. I want, when people come to this page, I want it to feel a bit more interesting, a bit more engaging. How can I do this? Right, so I'm going to get rid of this hotspot for now. And yeah, let me just get rid of that. We don't need that. Okay, cool. So now if I click on this element, it's like, okay, I want this image to kind of load in a really interesting way, in a fancy way. I click on the widget, go into the animation setting. And now I have a few preset options here where I can animate on load, which is on page load. I can animate on scroll, which is as soon as I start scrolling down the page, on hover, or on click, depending on what it is I want. So let's just say, because this is a top area, I'm going to do it on load. And then you have some presets here where you can say fade in. So let's just pick a preset, for example, and then I'll preview this. As you can see, that just fades in. Very, very simple, very straightforward. But let's just turn this off and delete that animation, and let's start again. So on load, I'm going to, rather than a preset, I'm going to do my own thing, right? So I'm going to, on load, I'm going to have this fade in from 0 to 100 opacity. I'm going to change the easing to ease out so that it feels a little less linear. And I'm also going to add another effect, which is to move it. So that's just gone down by default 10 pixels. So let's just say I'm going to move it by 50 pixels down. So that basically means it gives me a bit of margin up top here. So what I'm going to do is, to allow that animation to play properly, I'm going to move it up 50 pixels. So now if I click on the animation and I just click on preview, you can see that's what happens. This will happen on load. Happens a little bit faster. I'm going to say, let's increase that to 1 second. That feels a bit nicer. In fact, ease out, let's ease both because it feels a little bit more smooth. There you go. Great. Awesome. So that's the animation I've set to this page. I'm going to do a similar animation with this text here, but I'm going to do it the other way around. So on load, I'm going to change the opacity so to 100. Let's ease both. Change it to 1 second, but I'm going to add a delay of 0.2 seconds. I'm going to add that move effect where I'm going to go up 50. You can also go left and right if you want, depending on how you want to do it. But I'm just going to go up. I'm going to keep it relatively straightforward. So if I preview that, cool. So let's just see what happens when I preview and I see what happens with these two on load. Great, so that looks quite fun. So I'm going to, it kind of feels a bit too much. So I'm going to push it down 50. And now if I preview, great, that feels a lot more smooth, a bit nicer. So another thing I want to do is actually, I'm going to set a secondary animation to this one. If you go to the bottom of your settings and click on add, on scroll, I'm going to change this to move just up here or something, you know, so that it kind of feels like it moves away from the page. So let's just say 500. So now if you see on load, it does that. And then if I scroll, that kind of moves there. So it starts to feel a little bit more interactive now. So these are on page settings. So now what I'm going to do is this stuff down here, I'm going to change these to on scroll animation. So if I click on the animation tab here, rather than on load, I'm going to click on scroll, and then I'm going to move that. I'm going to be more horizontal about this. I'm going to change that and then maybe move that 30 pixels to the right. And let's ease that out, which basically means I've got to push it back 30 pixels. And other than move, I'm going to do the opacity as well. And then basically I'm going to do the same thing with this. So I've just copied those same settings, but I'm going to change that to -30. Now, if I go to the top, this happens on load. As I scroll, that happens. And oh, I didn't change that. 1 second. Change this back down to 0.5. Now, another thing you can do is you can change the start point. So you can have it start at the bottom. You can have the animation start from when it hits the center, or you can have it start from when it hits the top of the page. For this section, I think the bottom makes sense, but I'm going to create a bit more buffer here where maybe give it a margin of 100 pixels so that it doesn't happen too quickly. So you can see here, like it's happening, but it's happening too quick for anyone to kind of see this. So I'm going to change that to maybe the center. So I've only done the text at the moment, but that feels like it takes too long now. So again, I'm going to change that. Let's go back to the bottom and then let's just increase that a bit more. So let's just say 300. Let's do the same with this. So now, there you go. And this happens on scroll. So as soon as I get to that point, that 300 pixel margin, you can start animating things in and be really interactive and interesting with the way you do stuff. Now again, with the button, the hover state works nicely. You know, this is very clear that, you know, it's a button, I can click it, but I'm going to go a next step further with this. So move it down a little bit. So I'm going to set an animation which is on hover. I want it to move up 10 pixels, ease out. And if I preview that, that's what will happen if I hover it. Let's just change this to 0.3. And then I'm also going to add another one, which is on click. So on click, I'm going to change it to move 2 pixels. And the reason for that is to make it feel like I'm actually physically pressing the button. What happens now? There you go. And that just goes to page 2. So this just feels a lot more interactive now. And you can go crazy with these animations. You can do all kinds of stuff, you know, like with this image, for example, I'm just going to go mental, right? So I'm going to add another effect. I'm going to go rotate. Let's just go crazy with this. Let's go 200 degrees. And as you can see now, it's like, you know, things can go mental. You can go really crazy with them and really experiment with them. So again, have fun with this, experiment, play around with some stuff and see if you can come up with some interesting animations. And that's effectively it. So if I change this to scale, then this will feel more like, you know, a fully utilized page. Yeah, it's a bit mental, but it works. Yeah, not the greatest design, but you get the idea. Any questions?
Abdi, no specific question about the presentation, which I found very useful. So thank you for that. Sorry, I had to take a phone call halfway through, but you won't have heard that, but at least I was able to deal with something on the side. One thing I was going to ask you generally, I mean, this platform looks really to be quite flexible and effective. I looked at their paid for programs earlier, the cost of that looked quite reasonable as well. It looked to me like the monthly fee could equate to just having a fee for a Squarespace site, and yet on this platform you can create more than one site for that price.
Yeah.
So that was quite. Oh, sorry, that was quite interesting. Oh, that's my boss. There we go. I have to bounce that call. I noticed here that you're putting a lot of links into third-party providers such as YouTube, etc. And I have been to people's sites in the past where they've put those links in good faith, and then you go to the site and find that the link is dead for some reason. Yeah. Do they, as a provider, have a system that they run the site effectively and poll it in the background and give you a report when links become dead automatically, or do you have some other way of doing that?
No, so that is a relatively manual thing, and obviously you are reliant on those third-party platforms because that content is being hosted in multiple areas. So, for example, like ReadyMag hosts their sites on AWS, so they use the Amazon service for the most part. But obviously, things like video content are going to be hosted on Vimeo or YouTube. Now, if you're utilizing other people's content and accounts that you don't have access to, then obviously, you don't have control whether they delete that file or not. There's just no way around that. Unless you own those channels, unless you have a YouTube channel that you're linking directly to, you have control over that. So those links necessarily won't die unless you actually remove that video from your YouTube channel in that sense. So it depends on like what you have control over and what content you're utilizing.
Yeah, that point taken, and I appreciate the situation with it being third-party content, etc. On a classical site, I'm going back sort of 15, 20 years ago, where you had links embedded in to, and those hyperlinks might take you to other content somewhere. We would use systems to check those links in the background. And then when they went to that link, they'd look for something to appear like a pre-constructed string of text to prove not only that the link was working, but also it was the correct link. So, for example, in case somebody had changed something on their page that you were linking to, or that it had been hacked, for example. So you go to a link in good faith, and you turn out, instead of it showing you financial appraisal information, it shows you horse racing or something even more profound. So it sounds to me like that it can't do that, although we have a tool actually which would allow us to do it ourselves, I suppose.
I was going to say, yeah, there's I'm almost certain there's a whole bunch of other tools that can actually do that for you.
Yeah.
But I understand what you mean. Like I know some traditional kind of web hosting platforms do those for you as part of the price.
Yeah.
But because this is relatively an experimental tool and obviously does rely on a bunch of those third-party platforms, it doesn't really rely, like, things like YouTube and Vimeo, they're relatively established.
Yeah.
So the likelihood is they're not really going to go anywhere. And the platforms it does utilize are ones that are actually going to be sticking around for quite some time. So they try to be as reliable as possible in the sense that, all the integrations, so things like Stripe when it comes to the commerce side, aren't things that are going to be relatively finite.
Yeah, no, thank you.
So that kind of pretty much wraps it up, but I think what would be really good is I'm going to set you guys some homework. And I say homework, it's nowhere near like homework. But what I'd love to see is all of you to kind of create a website. And it doesn't have to be anything comprehensive. It doesn't have to be very difficult or complex. It just needs to be something very, very standard. It can just be some text, some imagery. I encourage you to kind of explore and experiment with layouts, experiment with those animations, play around with the tool, try things on both mobile and desktop and tablet as well. Think about the kinds of projects that you'll be doing on this, whether it's for your personal self or whether you want to do things on behalf of a client. Learn the limitations and learn the flexibilities within the platform. And as I say, like, we use this regularly for specific things. We use this for our case studies and we use this quite a lot for presentations. We don't really use it for client-based projects just because the type of work that we do is very objective based and very reliant on the unique problems they're solving for that client. So based on the fact that ReadyMag is a relatively limited platform in terms of what it can do, obviously we don't see it in the sense to solve as many problems for clients, especially the ones that we come across. Some of it might, in which case we'd recommend it, but in other times, a lot of the works that we do is largely, for the most part, custom in that sense. But play around with it, explore it. If you need some inspiration in terms of doing your website, look at the explore page on ReadyMag. There's so many really good examples there. Like, people are experimenting to the point where they're almost breaking the platform. So, and that's a good thing, because then it always highlights potential future features that they add on it. And that's one great thing from being one of the early adopters of this platform. They have been amazing at constantly adding new features and new functionalities within the platform. And it's been completely evolved since the first time we used it. And it's been amazing to kind of see that process happen, as well as play a very small part in it. So yeah, so what would be great is if next week, Wednesday, we potentially do a follow-up call, which is about an hour long, if that works for everyone. I'd love to be able to see all the things that you guys create. And at the same time, I think there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions. So typically I've done this masterclass with like a bunch of other groups before. And usually what happens is, you know, I'm very much aware that I've been relatively talking at you. So I understand that maybe not all that information can be quite instantly absorbed and kind of comprehended straight away. So play around with it and start compiling a list of questions that you have. If you struggle with anything, if you come across a feature or something, it's like, I couldn't do this, I tried to do this and I couldn't figure out how to do this, start kind of listing out all those questions. And then basically next week, as we go over everything that you've done, we can also go over questions, struggles, and difficulties that you've had while using the platform.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks very much, Abdi. That was really, really good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. How does everyone feel about it?
It's great. I got someone to do my website a few weeks ago, and just the whole grid thing was incredible. When I was chatting to them about lining everything up, it was just a really difficult conversation. And I've done a few websites for previous businesses before, and the same kind of issue that pops up is aligning everything and just that small attention to detail. And it's great that this has that feature.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. Like, as I say, like we've used a whole bunch of stuff before, and for the most part, a lot of those other platforms, including Webflow, which is a great tool, they still relatively rely on the rigid way of creating those layouts and creating sections and div placeholders and basically putting everything in boxes, right? Whereas ReadyMag is in our opinion the best open, like, blank canvas tool that you can use, because you can quite literally just drag things anywhere you want them to be and then decide whether you want to fix them or keep them static or whatever it is. So there's a lot more freedom in terms of the layout that you can do.
Nice. So I've recorded this as well, and I'll post it into the workshop group, and then we'll also set the task in writing for everyone, so we can get people to join us next week.
Just one final question, actually, if I may, for Abdi. I will do some homework, hopefully, and I should be able to join you for, Serena, if you arrange it for about 3 o'clock or later.
Yeah.
I could certainly, I've actually got to come off a meeting at 3 o'clock, so I may just join you a few minutes later, but 3 o'clock would be fine for me. Abdi, just to help me here, and I don't want you to do my homework for me, I want you to tell me something's possible. You showed links to sound files, which you said would have to be in SoundCloud.
Yes.
And I guess, and YouTube's there as well. So I wanted to do something for my radio show, which was to create a page where I could put up 3 pieces of music after a show, and then I can get the audience to vote on their favorite one of those 3 during the week to be played on the next show. So presumably I could do that quite easily by presenting the 3 on a page, and then is there a way of voting? Is there a simple widget for voting?
So there's not a specific widget for voting, but this is something I've seen people do quite a lot, where they have the audio file, and underneath that audio file, they add that Facebook like button.
Okay.
And they just duplicate it. So they just have a button underneath each track, and you can see live on the page how many people have liked it. So you can kind of create a workaround to that voting system in a way.
Okay, and I suppose I could then get the data, parse it, so people can't vote 2 or 3 times, you know, the same person, I suppose.
So they can vote numerous times. So say, for example, if they voted all 3 of them, they technically could do that.
Yeah.
But if I can't vote the same one multiple times, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so somebody votes for all 3 of them, it's actually made no real difference to its position.
No, not really.
They've got to use different accounts in order to get around that system if they were going to. Yeah, that's fine. I'll have a little play with that, and so that'll be my homework anyway. Thank you very much.
I guess you might be able to do it in a form. You could have a form kind of sitting next to each of the sound bites, couldn't you?
You could do, yeah. So basically, another way of doing it is creating a form that links to a Google sheet, where you create those fields, and you basically, you can kind of put those, put that criteria and put that information there, which goes into a Google sheet, which you just check later.
All right, that's good. Thank you.
Another option is, again, depending on the package that you have, is you can just embed a poll. So if you have a third-party polling platform that you can use that has an embed code, then you can just kind of place that into the page.
I haven't. I'll think about it, but I'm going to try the basic stuff that you've already mentioned. So we'll see.
I think that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Abdi, thank you, Serena, for facilitating as well. I'm going to have to head off now.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.